student housing is such a unique industry. The more unique an industry is, the more important it is for that industry to have a resource and a platform to share ideas and data, to determine best practices, and a platform to simply promote networking among the professionals in that industry. That's what we are setting out to provide with Student Housing Insight. But what's even more unique about the student housing industry is how unique those professionals are. They want to make a positive impact on the students and the university communities they serve. They understand they have an opportunity to touch the future. They come to work every day looking for ways to make that future bright. If you're one of those people, come be a part of Student Housing Insight. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ShopTalk for June 2023. Carly and Ruthie, how are you guys doing?
Doing good. Happy Tuesday.
Doing great. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. Really quick while I'm waiting for Charlie to join, and I need to switch over to our slides. Give me just a second. There we go. I always feel lost without slides.
Okay.
So guys, welcome to the Shop Talk for June. I hope everyone is having a fantastic summer so far. Wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. First, let's go with talking about chat. We want to make sure that with this platform that we're using, that we're providing engagement, not just with our panel, but amongst each other. We really want this to be kind of a virtual meeting place each month for the industry. So really encourage you to use chat. That's over in the right-hand corner. Also, if you've got questions for our panel, make sure that you put that under the Q&A part of the chat. That way I can see that. Also, if you'd like to come on to the virtual stage and ask questions or make a point to our audience, you can do that by hitting the request to speak. Once you hit that, you'll go through a couple of audio video checks, and then I can bring you onto the stage. So guys, we do not have an update from NMHC this week. Both Dave and Matthew were traveling. We're not going to be able to make it, but they did want me to tell you guys that registration opens today for the NMHC Student Housing Conference, which is going to be in Las Vegas this year at Charlie, I'll see you. Give me just a second here. That registration opens up today on their website at nmhc.org. If you want to go take a look at that and register. I'm not exactly sure when the early bird expires for that, but that is October 17th through 19th. So looking forward to seeing everyone there. Well, guys, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our monthly review of what's happening nationally, both regionally and nationally with pre-leasing. Charlie, welcome.
You didn't let me in. I was sitting there for 10 minutes. Kidding.
No, I'm kind of getting to a stage where I need somebody to do all the technical
You need a
stuff.
button pusher. You need a button pusher, and I can help you find one. But no, excited to walk through things today. Getting close to the end of the leasing cycle. So
Push is here, that's for sure.
Yeah. So the benefit what I'll talk about is I still got good news, as I have had for the last 6-7 months now. But I know really what the topic of the conversation is kind of prepping those last 60-90 days. We're June 12th, 13th today, and most of these markets are in the high 70s, 80s, 90s. But there are some nuances there. I know not everything is doing perfectly well. Perfectly well, that's not a really great word. As expected in years past, right? Which we'll talk about with our lovely panelists today. But Wes, if you want to go ahead and start moving through this slides.
Well, yeah, and really quick, just let's go ahead and introduce the panelists.
All right, I thought you had done that while I was sitting in the waiting room for 10 minutes.
Carly, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Carly Shepard. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Student Quarters. Proud to be part of the squad. We own and manage 31 properties with over 11,000 beds from Florida to California, based in Atlanta.
Ruthie?
All right. My name is Ruthie Woodard. I'm the Director of Leasing at University Partners. We also own and manage a portfolio of 18 properties, 19 now actually with the newest acquisition of Canvas Tempe in Tempe, Arizona. So super excited about that. 11,000 beds total, roughly. And again, we're based in Dallas, Texas, and we own and manage properties from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Well, fantastic. Charlie, you want to jump into the report?
Let's rock and roll. Carly, Ruthie, excited to chat through things today and see where your thoughts are. Nationally, I will say we have seen a little bit of a slowdown in the leasing velocity. I think the peak was somewhere around 9 to 10%. Again, over the last at least 3 weeks, that gap has gone from 5.7 to 2 roughly about 2%. From a floor plan perspective, again, everything's upwards, in the 80s, which is great to see from a national perspective. And what's really beneficial is the velocity that we're still seeing on the larger unit types. I know, with the 3s and 4s really being two of the largest ones, a little harder to fill towards the end of the leasing cycle, but still seeing, about 150 basis points, almost 2% there on the 4s, and then on the 3s, you're seeing roughly about 2.4%. So that's great to see from a velocity standpoint. But it's no question the summer months have definitely slowed things down now that school is not in session. And a lot of that leasing is done virtually via phone, et cetera. If you want to keep going, Wes, through the slides. And from national perspective, again, we're roughly about 2.3, 2.4, depending on the rounding, percent ahead of where we were this time last year. Benefit is the market ended about 94% last year. So we're still ahead by, 2 to 2.5%. I still feel that we're going to break the records from last year from where we end up here in the next 90 days. Really from a standpoint of the national, nice little hone in there on the national average. There was a nice little addition there. I will say one thing that is definitely encouraging, again, going to the 4 bedrooms. You're 3% ahead there. The largest subset of beds, and I know that's pretty unique to student housing as it relates to the conventional market, but almost 3% ahead. And, I think we have like 430,000 beds we're tracking of that specific floor plan here from a year-over-year basis. Again, that's great to see. And then that's driving a lot of this outperformance. Ruthie, Carly, give me some insight. What are you seeing at your respective portfolios kind of here in the last little bit? What's left?
Yeah. Carly, want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, no problem. So this definitely lines up with what we're seeing at our own portfolio. Majority of our properties have the biggest number of 4-bedroom beds. The slowdown isn't surprising. Again, we're around the 90s, mid 90s to high 90s, a lot of our properties. So it's expected to slow down a bit because now we're having these roommate matching, situations going on. But the properties that we do have still a good bit of 4 bedrooms to move. Again, I'm not surprised by the traffic right now because when you think about orientation trends, even for summer, usually those coming in June are, those students who have already been on top of it. They have their acceptance letters. They're probably living on campus. Like they're on top of everything. It's those late June, July crowd of orientation that are usually the ones who are last minute and looking for those last minute spots. So we're expecting an uptick from that standpoint, like I say, end of June, July for sure. Again, just considering orientation trends over the years, usually June attendees are already on top of everything as it is. But we're definitely preparing for that flood to come in end of June, July from orientations.
Yeah, same here. We've got, majority 4 bedrooms open, some specific markets, more 2 bedrooms open, but definitely still have a large number of 4 bedrooms to fill. We still are waiting on the international students to come in some markets too. Champaign, Illinois, waiting on you there. And then like in Columbus, Ohio, we have a lot of 2 bedrooms left there, but majority of our portfolio is 4s, a couple of 2s and 5 bedrooms. And overall, our pre-leasing year over year is staying along the same trends. Like we were ahead the beginning of the year of the leasing season, way ahead year over year. And that's kind of come more down, right in line with year over year for us now too. So we're waiting on those orientations to happen, those late bloomers to come, and those international students.
I wanted to ask you really quick. I went back and looked at our report from last June, and same week we were 8.83% ahead of 2021, and then of course just mentioned that we were 2.4% ahead of this time last year in 2022. It sounds like with your portfolios, you're kind of running, in sync with where you were at last year. Are you seeing in some of your markets where, that delta may not be quite as wide as what it was last year?
I mean, for us specifically, yes. There's some markets where, last year we were 10, 15% ahead year over year and kept it through the whole leasing season. And this year, like Starkville, Mississippi, for example, it's the complete opposite this year, where last year we were running ahead. This year we're running the opposite. We're running, 10, 15% behind where we were last year. So that one is definitely concerning. But our portfolio as a whole, now we're more in line, kind of right on track with where we were year over year.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we stay that way.
Well, I think the one thing that I've seen in talking with the different groups we work with is that velocity is kind of leveled out, but that rate growth is here. So
Huge.
You'd expect some level of slowdown where you meet kind of that I guess the inflection point of the price point. So with the industry, for example, I think this is a good segue to jump into the next kind of piece here, Wes, if we want to jump over to the rent growth side. I think we got a couple more. Keep going. Here we go. On the rate trend side, go to the next one. We'll show the year-over-year numbers. Breaks out. We're roughly about 11.1%, and we've been, somewhere, I think the lowest was 9.8% year over year. So somewhere around that, 10 to 12% throughout this whole leasing cycle, which with the market still ahead on pre-leasing, it shows that there is still runway for next year. And I think one of the big things that we have seen is, the lessons learned from the operational side of those markets that are way ahead. Hey, the difference in that starting rate versus the end rate, that gap may be $150, $200 in some instances even higher, which will allow for kind of a playbook for next year to better understand just how the market's reacting, how those prices are kind of leveling out. But I mean, fundamentally, 11.1% year over year was still outperformance on the pre-leasing side. Tip of the cap to the industry there on I guess remaining resilient through this kind of high interest rate environment. Again, we've talked about the 6 bedrooms 17,000 different times on ShopTalk. Again, one of the the lowest number of beds, but also the lowest renewal rate from a floor plan perspective. But you can see here across the board. I mean, from a 1 bedroom, it's a little harder to get to go up as high, but still almost $100 per bed there or studios, and the 1 bedrooms, a little somewhere between $100, $120 there on a year-over-year basis on rent. I mean, that's pretty significant jumps. I know that's not the largest subset in all these deals, but down to the smaller or the larger unit types, like on a 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom, 13%. It's pretty remarkable to see how that has changed and how that's continued to stay the trend. Yeah.
Carly and Ruthie, I'm kind of wondering with renewals, both because of the rate increases, as well as with, especially in tier 1 markets, we had a lot of velocity, very early on. I'm just kind of wondering, are you guys already planning to start your renewal campaigns? I actually talked to a manager last week who told me she's already sending out offers to people who have not renewal offers to people who have not even moved in yet. So just kind of curious as to how this past year out, it's already impacting renewals for next year and what you guys are thinking about that.
Hold on, Ruthie, I think you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Testing.
It happens to me all the time. You're good.
So
we're
not at that point just yet. From a renewal timeline, though, there are certain markets in our portfolio like Knoxville, Tempe, State College, that we will begin renewals earlier than the rest of the portfolio, and that's just because that's what the market demands. But from a renewal standpoint overall, we're going to continue the same timeline that we did do last year. If anything, we're going to probably move up our renewal deadlines compared to last year. In the past, when we would use a renewal deadline, is usually for that just sense of urgency and that push, but this year we saw that we had to actually stick to those deadlines because we had a wait list of people ready to sign and take over those spaces. So we had to really stick to it, but we already advertised a deadline. So we had to honor that date. So if anything, we'll start at the same time in our different markets, but we'll move up our renewal deadline. For example, if it was December 31st last year, and maybe as early as November 15th or 30th next year.
Yeah, same here. We're not quite ready to send out renewal offers for next year. We're like dead in the middle of rate setting. Right now, I would love to be able to do that. I know this year we have had several markets where people asked to sign multi-year leases where, they want their lease to end in 2025 the same rate instead of in 2024. And obviously was a no-go for me because we want that rate growth. But our early renewals last year were insane. Like I said, we already have people asking, but we're not rolling that out yet. We do plan on rolling out renewals on move-in day at select markets. Like Tempe was really hot for us this year too. Clemson's really hot market for renewals, Michigan State. So all of those will be definitely a move-in day offer for renewal, etc. But overall, same as Ruthie, kind of select markets moving up the renewal deadlines from last year. So if it was a December 31st, we'll probably go November 15th or the week after Thanksgiving. Sticking to those deadlines a little bit harder. We gave some leeway with those deadlines last year too, which was great for the incoming new residents, but some of our renewals didn't like it. So excited to see what we can do next year with renewals. We're 5% ahead year over year just in our renewals. So in some of our markets, we have like a 60% renewal rate, which is insane to me. So hopefully we can repeat that again next year.
Yeah,
So I've got a question here from Mike Redeker. What type of students do the late bloomers, that's in quotation, represent? Transfers, ? Waitlisters, ? Are the bloomers more price conscious than other students?
To me, I consider the late bloomers the people who kind of waited longer to get their acceptance letters. Maybe they're not in tier 1 schools, tier 2 schools. We have quite a few properties kind of in those markets too, where the students wait longer. It's a later market. I do think they are much more price conscious. They're looking for the value and they're looking for the special. And they're going to shop around a lot more than the people who kind of come in and want the bright new shiny penny.
Yeah, I definitely echo that as well. Again, those who maybe accepted those offer letters or those letters, but they finally committed, decided on that school, transfers, international students, or you're going to see in that last wave. Definitely price conscious, but again, if the market is, if they're standing at those rates and those specials, then they have no choice, but to choose. But yeah, definitely those we consider your late bloomers.
Gotcha. What is there anything in your markets this year that's surprising you as far as how things are ending up?
I mean, we have a couple markets where I already talked about Starkville for a little bit. Like, I'm really surprised that our Starkville market has been so slow. It's like every day I'm just waiting that the university is going to release people from the dorms or announce that they're full, or, something catastrophic in a good way for us is going to happen where we can fill up these beds. I just don't know where these students are and why they're waiting and why it's taken so long. That one's been really surprising. And then Columbus, Ohio at OSU, it's tier 1. It's a great school, huge school. People want to go there. And that our property is trending behind year over year, as well as that market. And that one was not on my bingo card for this year either. And we have a small property there, and it's genuinely very well located to campus, the med school, the law school. You would think it's easy to fill up. It's 145 beds, little boutique, cute property, and it has been the struggle.
Charlie, I know last summer we did a deep dive in Columbus. I think it was either June or July, and there was a lot coming on board.
Yeah.
How are those panning out?
I mean, from a new dev side, I think when we had our development panel with a couple weeks, I think it was last ShopTalk, it's definitely a challenge modern era in that first year lease up, right? There's assets that are sitting at 60, 65%, where this time next year, for having the same conversation, they're going to be 90, 95, right? And I think that's kind of one of the tough sentiments about the development side right now. It's a 2-year lens. And, whatever these developers are underwriting for year one is, I've talked to some that's even 75, 80%, again, depending on the market. But, I think there's two traditional student deals and maybe kind of a hybrid leasing up there in Columbus right now. But with 50, as Carly mentioned, like 50,000+ students, there shouldn't be that big. And I think there was an enrollment increase of somewhere right around 1% or so. Don't quote me on that. I think one of the big pieces of the puzzle in Columbus is the shadow market being so large. The student competitive single family rentals near campus, but it's interesting. I don't think there's any lack of students. Maybe they're just taking a while. That's the Starkville thing. I mean, you asked where the students were. There's 4% less year over year from an enrollment standpoint. So it's definitely you can see some of those impacts where there's markets that even have enrollment down that everything's up just because, again, just the way that the off-campus market has rebounded from kind of the troubles that the on-campus side has faced during COVID. So we all know this. Every market's different, but there's one new deal in Starkville right now too.
Yeah.
Again, still, under that kind of national average there, but it's an interesting last little, like 145 beds. The market's at 96%. Again, it keeps you up at night because you want to, you strive for the goals and making sure you're doing so. It'd be different if you had 1,400 beds and you still had, 300 to fill at this current time. Yeah. So, Columbus, we did that deep dive. I know I think there's another one coming next year too, from a new dev perspective. But yeah.
So Carly, tying that back to rates for those markets. I mean, because that still hasn't stopped you from raising rates this year, obviously. But
yeah,
what are the conversations, especially in those markets where things? I hate saying get back to normal, but
yeah.
Are you guys having rate discussions internally about, hey, maybe we need to hold off and see where things are going to land before we start pushing again, or what is that like?
Absolutely. We have in Columbus, we've taken a step back. We've offered a little bit more than what we've ever had to offer there. It's a small boutique property that comes along with a very small marketing and leasing budget. So we've had to make some changes there to accommodate some additional expenses there, but we've definitely rolled back some of our rate increases that we've done. We've offered some specials there. And the same in Starkville, we've had to do the same thing there where we've offered some, the $599 5 bedrooms there to us is a steal. It was a steal last year. It was a steal up until January. And then people were like, whoa, this is not a steal anymore. So we've had to kind of reevaluate more quickly or sooner than what we wanted to in Starkville too, where rate growth, national average is 11%. Our rate growth in Starkville is, 1.5%. So we're just trying to get heads on beds at this point there. And in Columbus, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. We're at like 2.5% there, and we'll probably honestly have to dial it back just a little bit more in order to get heads on beds. We're praying for some international students still coming in to Columbus.
They'll come back.
Yeah.
So I did just launch a poll asking the audience this question: in your market region or portfolio, what kind of average rent growth do you anticipate for next leasing season? And it's a multiple choice. So a normal 2 to 3% increase, 4 to 6%, and 7+. So if everyone right now it's 25, 75, 75% of folks saying they're going to raise 7+%. So I'll put that poll out there once everybody finishes. But Carly, back on that same question, is it a pullback of the rates, you think, or is it reintroduction of incentives maybe you haven't had to give away in the past couple of years?
We've done a mixture of both in Columbus. Like, we're just trying to stay competitive with the market. When you have new devs come in, they have a new dev budget. So we're trying to stay competitive with their rates and gift cards. And in Starkville, it's just people really like a 99 ending in their rate. So it's rolling back our rates to give them that $5.99 or $4.99 or $6.99 at one of our other sites there, to make it more appealing to them on paper. But both of them, we've peeled back rates. Columbus specifically, we're throwing a gift card in there too.
Gotcha.
It hurts my heart, believe me.
Ruthie, you guys experiencing that anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, as far as markets that have been very shocking this year, obviously, you know, we expect our tier one markets to, you know, perform high, you know, with rent growth and velocity. But one market that really surprised us this year was actually our secondary market, Huntsville, Texas. Our property there is trending ahead 20% year over year. Right now, you know, second highest in the market behind a conventional mix property. So, and I really contribute that success right now to our site teams. You know, in the Huntsville market, you know, there are options, and this is a very price conscious market as well. So there are options, there are gift cards, there are, you know, concessions going on, but we're maintaining that 83% right now without concessions and things like that. So it's been really, well, concessions right now. So it's been really, really shocking to see just how much movement they've made in this particular market. First I've seen in this market since we've been there.
Yeah,
the past few years.
I have not heard good things about Huntsville from other folks. What is there something you can attribute that to? Again,
some of our site teams. I mean, for one, the enrollment there, it was the biggest, the highest freshman class that they've seen in years. So definitely enrollment. So supply there is there. And our site teams has done a phenomenal job of just capturing those traffic, you know, making themselves stand out from competitors, with just the customer service and events and things like that. So again, enrollment for sure. But then our site teams as well, just kind of closing that deal. So that was one big shocker for us. Knoxville, again, you know, this year we have a property now. We now have two properties in that market, but one of the properties now we gave renewals 24 hours to renew because we had a wait list of over 500 people ready to sign. So I've always heard of those scenarios. This is the first time that I was actually in that position or seeing that, you know, front and center. So that was actually really exciting to see, and we were able to lease up that property in less than, you know, in 3 days. Just considering the deadlines that we had to push and how strategic we had to be with all of that. So as far as the challenges though, you know, we all have those challenging markets. Again, right now Huntsville is, you know, up there, but you know, it can go either way at this point. So we're staying on top of that and continuing to monitor them.
So on our poll, 45% of the folks said that they're planning increases for 7+%. And then there's a tie at 27% each, between 2 and 3%, 4 to 6%. Charlie, does that surprise you at all about that many folks saying that they're going to be 7+?
No. I mean, I'll die on the show. I said this, you know, 5 months ago, when we were talking about this for the first time. I'm very optimistic for next year. You know, there might be some leveling off in 24, 25. But for the sake of during the leasing year, I guess for 25, 26. But I think it's a couple things. If you look at kind of that loss to lease from the first lease to the last lease, I mean, that spread is massive at some of these properties, which again is going to contribute. Like, you know, some people leased up their 2 bedrooms in, like Ruthie mentioned, 3 days. You're going to price that so that slows down. Additionally, from the renewal strategies, right? I've seen, you know, you're going to check that T12 pretty or the rent roll pretty intently and see which group, you know, which individuals signed at what rate and what the market got to, and where do you think a net new lease, because there's a wait list of 500. That person who signed the first lease a year ago may have the cheapest rent in Knoxville, Tennessee, right?
Yeah.
And then additionally, there's less beds coming this coming year than there are this year. Roughly about around 34,000 or so coming next year from a delivery standpoint, just because it's very challenging on the development side. So with all that involved, I think, you know, we've got at least another, maybe even 2 years, but definitely one more year of outsized rent growth from that 3 to 5% that everybody's traditionally getting. You know, some markets like Fayetteville, Arkansas came out of nowhere with, I don't know if Carly even wants to disclose how much rent growth they got in Fayetteville, Arkansas, but from that standpoint, I've seen different, some one bedrooms are up to $16.99 where, people leased up immediately at $13.99. That's $300.
That's
right?
incredible.
So we'll see, but I'm very optimistic about it. The data says it based on the supply and demand factors and all the positive momentum going to a lot of these tier 1 universities. We're tracking all 270 of them or so. But then again, as both these lovely ladies said, there's exceptions to the rule, and there's some where you may be shooting for occupancy, but as an aggregate, I still think there's some strong performance where even with a high interest rate environment, I think the capital groups around that are outside the student housing sector are taking notice and piling into some strong fundamentals and a good outlook.
Great. Well, hey, I want to hit on the Western region because that's the region you are highlighting with this week's report.
Your format is killing me.
Can't see it.
The 566. It's okay. Yes, West Coast. Traditionally a little later start, a little longer ending, just based on when those schools start. But I mean, still seeing outperformance in the Western region, higher rate per bed, higher cost of living, as kind of a rule of thumb there. If you want to keep going, Wes, through this, we can look at a couple of these. You can see, again, trailing a little bit behind the U.S., but still up almost, 2.5%, 3%. Rate growth, roughly about 8.6%. And again, that's off of the highest rate per bed outside of the Northeast, which is a smaller subset. But again, still kind of that same trend. The larger unit types are seeing pretty strong numbers there. The 3s, 4s, and 5s, again, seeing pretty strong outperformance, but also look at the studios. I mean, they're up almost whatever that is. If my math serves me correct, I mean, that's above 8.6%. So it's interesting. There's, not as much from an inventory perspective. I know there's a lot of eyes there, specific on the California side on the new development, if they can battle the municipalities to get something done. But it just shows that even, across the board here, from a leasing velocity, I mean, 4 bedrooms still up almost through, what is it? Again, I can barely see these numbers, 3.3%. That's strong. So it's great to see that just from the Western region, given the fact that it is a little later behind, but I mean, 5% behind what the rest of the U.S. is when they started probably 6-7 weeks behind.
Yeah.
It's great.
Carly, Ruthie, I know you guys don't have a huge presence in the Western region, but I know there's some stuff in Sacramento and Little Rock, Colorado Springs, and then also I think you guys have a lot. Yeah, Boise, and then I think both of you have several things in Arizona. So how's that compared to the rest of your portfolio?
Go ahead, Carly. Okay. For us, I mean, just in Boise alone, I mean, they did a phenomenal job this year. We're already 100%, 10% rent growth in that market, and one of the first to reach 100% back in end of March. I mean, and then carry on to our Tempe markets. We have 3 properties there now, 2 at 100%, 1 at 95, 96% with those 4 bedrooms left to lease. So I do think that, it's really trailing with what we're seeing in the rest of our portfolio. I mean, they're hitting high rental rates, 20% ahead in rental growth in our Tempe markets on average. So, I mean, phenomenal job from our West Coast properties for sure.
Same. I'm an East Coast girl, but this year it's West Coast, Best Coast. They're killing it. Our Tempe property was our first in the portfolio to fill up. They hit 100%. I think it was in November, with over 17% rate growth. And normally don't fill up too fast. Don't hit 100% because I would rather push those rates and get more money in our pockets rather than hit 100% too quick. But I don't know if we could have pushed any harder, any faster, any more in Tempe, Arizona. Super proud of that team there. And then Colorado Springs too. Our site there is almost 62% renewed, which just blows my mind. with 10% rate growth there as well. And we're killing it in Sacramento, even though they have some new devs coming in there. They're still like 6% ahead year over year and have 9.5% rate growth. So more left to lease there in Sacramento than anywhere else. They're like 61% pre-lease. So we still got some room there, but it is a much later market. And, you know, they're killing it. All of our West Coast properties are doing great.
So we're about to jump into our next panel. I brought some of those panelists up, and Maddie, you actually had a question for the group on affordability. I think that could kind of create a great transition for our next discussion. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and ask that question.
Yeah, I was just curious. It's great to learn from the four of you really. But I'm hearing a lot about rate hikes, and I'm just curious what your affordability plan is so that we're not seeing only a certain subset of students able to live near campus in these kind of housing situations, and just how your companies are creating more equitable housing, and what y'all think about that.
It's a great question. I mean, really, it's the first one up to bat plays ball, right? So in most of our markets, if you want the best rate at our properties, you got to be first in line to sign that lease. That I would say 92-93% of our assets, because it's just so competitive right now. But luckily, I know in a lot of our markets, there are more affordable options than what we provide. We have a lot of Class A assets that were built, you know, within the last 4 to 5 years that are close to campus, walkable. So the closer you are to campus, the newer the property is, the more you're going to pay in rent. So there's definitely more affordable options there. It might not just be us.
I would definitely second that too. When I think about just from an enrollment standpoint, I mean, they're expecting enrollments to decline in 2025 from what they call the enrollment cliff. So they're expecting a decline. So I know the universities, for what it seems like this year, and why I think we're going to see the rates we want for next year, is because they're pushing out, you know, every effort to increase enrollment across the market. So from a supply demand standpoint, the supply will be there, the students will be in the market. And just like Carly said, you know, it may not be our particular properties, because we also, again, have those high-rise style floor plans, properties close to campus, but we also have some that are further away from campus that are more price conscious. But then there's also certain markets where we know that we can't go past a certain point. You know, from a socioeconomic standpoint, we know that there is only a max that we can get in certain markets. So in a way, we're going to, you know, stay in our lane in those markets. But in those tier 1 markets where we could definitely push, we will, but understanding that, you know, if they can't afford us, there will be affordability options in that market, whether it's from concessions and gift cards towards their rent, things like that. There will be options for there. But again, just some markets we're going to stay where we are, because, I mean, we understand that max cap.
Right. Well, guys, thanks so much for taking the time out today to help us with our panel and giving us the insight that you guys are having with, you know, inside your own portfolios. And I think we're all better for it. It's great to come together and hear what's happening with everybody else. Charlie, thanks again so much for the fantastic data. And
of course, and I'm going to plug one thing real quick. If you haven't seen our webinar on Thursday, talking about underwriting and forecasts for next year, we've got a great lineup. Ryan Lang from Newmark, Jacqueline Fitz from CBRE, Ian Bradley from TSB, Brendan Miller, CI Core Spaces, and Greg Martini, who heads up investments at Cardinal. Be a great one. You want to hear me talk a little bit less and let them talk? That's for you. So Thursday, it's all on LinkedIn. And if you want the link to register, please send me an email. Shoot me a message.
Perfect. Yeah, I will. I'll make sure it's in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow as well. So
appreciate it.
Thanks,
awesome.
Everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Carly, Ruth, you're the best.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Well, guys, really quick, while I'm waiting for Chris to join us, he's someone else with our ESG panel that's coming on. I wanted to talk to you really quick. One of the reasons we're talking about ESG next is because it's not something that I'm necessarily, excited about and that type of thing. It's one of those topics that I would rather just wait till a conference and hear what everybody else has to say. But our leadership committee, everything that we talk about here on Shop Talk is really led by our leadership committee. They come up with the monthly topics outside of our leasing update and our updates from NMHC. And I have to tip my hat to those guys. We've got a total of 6 of them. 2 of them they have terms that are expiring this year in July. And so we actually have right now a time where we're actually taking in new interest form, or we've got an interest form for folks that want to come in and fill those vacant spaces that are coming up in August. So if that's something you would like to do, you can scan that QR code. I'll also launch an offer here in just a second that will show up where you can click directly to that. Let's see, do we have Chris on yet? I'm not seeing him. Hold on just a second, guys. Chris, you may have to raise your hand again. I'm not sure why it's not letting you come in. All right, let's go ahead and get to the next session. For those that may not know anything about ESG, let's just give a kind of a quick overview. For those that have not been kind of paying attention this past couple of years, ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Corporate Governance. It's a business framework for considering environmental and social issues in context of corporate governance that is applied by investment and lending firms who want to direct their money toward companies that are socially responsible. May of last year, we actually did a section on ESG. It was very focused on sustainability that Echelon Energy helped us out with, but also gave a big kind of 50,000-foot view of ESG. So if you want a little bit more of kind of the basics of ESG, I would suggest going to our website and pulling that up. It was May of 22 that we did that. But like I said, the leadership committee kind of wanted to come back in and had a couple of things that they wanted to talk about. They wanted to talk about an SEC rule that is pending of being released that we're going to talk a little bit about that is going to affect REITs specifically. And then also wanted to get a little bit of an update on social and governance. And so we've got a fantastic group here today that can explain all of that to us. And with that being said, I'll let them introduce themselves.
Sure, I can go ahead and get started. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Jill Brosig. I'm the Chief Impact Officer for Harrison Street. And my background in ESG, I've been doing this role for quite a number of years, but prior to that, I actually started out as a physicist. That was my original role. And probably the thing that's most interest that would tie into ESG is one of the jobs that I had that I was doing research in inertial confinement fusion. And fusion is how the sun makes energy. So we're really trying to capture how the sun makes energy. If you were able to do that, then you'd have this source of clean, reliable, perpetual energy. So not in that field anymore, but that's the kind of insight that I bring to what we're doing. At Harrison Street, we've had a formal ESG program since 2013. We have a fully dedicated team that works on this, plus we have a number of committees, and it really has permeated itself throughout the whole organization. Pretty much everyone in the organization has some level of ESG goals, and it really is a part of how we make investment decisions, what we do when we're holding onto assets, and even when we dispo. So I'll turn it over to Chris to let him introduce himself.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Chris.
Okay. My name is Chris Loftman, and I'm the Senior Director of Energy and Sustainability for Greystar. I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and ESG, before we called it ESG for 10 years. We called it sustainability or just trying to make a difference back in the day. Most of you are probably familiar with Greystar, but just because of our size and positioning in the market with over $240 billion in real estate under management and operation and in 130 different markets globally, we are exposed to a lot of trends that come in different directions and influence other markets. So we tend to be on the cutting edge to kind of understand, hey, what's this going on in Europe? It'll soon impact the U.S. In the U.S. specifically, just kind of speaking generally, I'll let Maddie speak specifically to student, but we manage roughly 2,800 properties in 49 states, and that's across multifamily, student, active adult, and other real estate verticals.
And my name is Maddie. I'm on Chris's team at Greystar, Director of Sustainability. And before this, I was at a different multifamily company, really building the groundwork for a vertically integrated sustainability program. And to follow Jill's lead before that, I was doing life cycle assessment research. So I really enjoy seeing all the different parts of a system and how they all fit together and what the different impacts of all of that is. So I see sustainability as a big puzzle in multifamily, and I'm excited to talk about it here. Greystar has over 85,000 student beds, and that's just in the US. So our team has a US focus, but Greystar is global.
Well, fantastic. One thing that's really kind of struck me is I've been working with you guys over the past week and preparing for this is the fact that, these positions are now, really required positions for, for companies that are certainly your size and dealing with the REITs. And just kind of curious if I didn't really prep you guys for this question, but at what point does someone need to, not just, or a company specifically, need to think about having someone full-time in some type of ESG role? I think every company probably, kind of assigns it to someone, but just kind of wondering from your own experience, at what point, does it make sense for someone to bring somebody on board that's focused on it full-time?
I'll take a stab. There's not a magic formula, obviously, right? The key factor is when you have people. So either you have people in your buildings, you have people in your organization, or you have people that are investors that are trying to invest. So any one of those factors, and obviously we have probably a combination thereof, probably with every organization out there on this call, you just have to look at and see what is the burden, between the, DDQs that investors are asking. You have all kinds of compliance. You have laws that are coming into place. You have, you alluded to the SEC rule and the regulations with that. It's can definitely be a full-time job. It just depends on the amount of assets you have and the amount of reports you're doing, et cetera. I wish I could give you a formula, but I don't have a formula to tell you when you hit this, you need it. I don't know over at Harrison Street, Jill.
Yeah, I would agree. There's not a formula, but I think it does depend on what your brand is and what you want to state. I mean, much of this you could outsource to someone else and have them do a lot of the reporting for you. You could have a more junior person do it. Like I said, we have a fully dedicated team, and a lot of, and it's great starting as folks as well. 2 of them are on the call here too. But it really depends on where do you want to position yourself. There's a whole section of ESG that you have to do. You have to respond to an investor request. There's certain reports you have to do. But where do you want to take it beyond that? How proactive do you want to be? What kind of footprint do you want to say, or what kind of brand do you want to say about what your ESG messaging is? We're trying to be really forward thinking in terms of what we're doing. In fact, our mission is that we really try to do pioneering things. And the only way you can do that is if we're doing it in-house and we're coming up with our own strategy. So I think there's a difference between what you're forced to do or have to do versus what you want to do because it's part of who you are as a company, as an entity.
Great. Well, I did launch a poll question. What has your ESG experience, or what has your experience been with ESG so far? And the answers range from I was today years old when I learned about ESG to ESG compliance is one of my main responsibilities. Right now, it looks like everybody's coming in kind of in the middle of, I know generally what it is, but it doesn't really impact my day-to-day, or it's a topic that is coming up more and more in more and more conversation. So I think we've got kind of the perfect audience for you guys to be speaking with. Let's jump on this this SEC rule that is coming out. For those that aren't aware, the SEC mandated, I believe that came out in March of last year, for all public companies that climate risk is a material financial risk factor, and therefore it would be there would need to be some reporting and some risk mitigation that would have to happen because of that. The rule was targeted to begin in October of 22, but due to a SCOTUS ruling on there's a suit between West Virginia and the EPA, that's been pushed back to come out at any point in time. But that is not stopping companies from preparing based on what the SEC has previously provided. So my first question for the panel is, will this rule apply to any REIT that is registered with the SEC or only publicly traded REITs?
I mean, SECs are governed by REITs are governed by the SEC by design. So while you may not be publicly reporting, you still need to file with the SEC typically. So the way the rule was originally written and seems to be holding up through the public comment and et cetera, is that it applies to any entity governed by the SEC. So at this point, the position that most of the industry seems to be taking is if you're a REIT, this will affect you, and or if you're publicly publicly traded, it will affect you.
Maddie or Jill, do you have anything to add to that?
Maybe just to add, one thing to think about is there's one thing that the SEC is saying, but there's another thing you should be doing just because it's good business practices. So when you went to the previous slide where you were talking about this whole, that the SEC is saying that physical risks are material, you need to be looking at what physical risk is for all of your assets, regardless of what the SEC is saying. That's just good business practice. You should be aware of if it's at risk for whatever, hurricanes, wildfires, sea level rise, you name it, and making sure that you have those mitigation practices and those mitigation processes and practices completed. When we're seeing more hurricanes, more flooding, globally, we're seeing these types of things. Investors are getting leery that how safe are our investments. And so there's one thing, we have to do it because we're being told, but the other thing is you should be doing it already.
Yeah, right.
And Wes, if I could just add on, because it's such a perfect point. ESG, honestly, and we kind of talked about this in our pre-meeting, this is about risk management. Our investors invest not to lose money, right? I mean, any investor is not intending to lose their investment. They're looking to protect it. So this is just another step to make sure that you are evaluating what may impact that investment. So whether you think ESG affects you or not, if you have assets and those assets have value, there's risks. And if you're not managing those risks, then that's where ESG comes in. We're looking at what may impact you from a climate perspective, from an operational perspective, as far as NOI. We're looking at it from diversity and all kinds of other areas that we'll get into. But the point being is this is risk management at the end of the day.
Well, and that was my next question. With this proposed rule that they put out, is it more about setting emission requirements, or is it really focused on just disclosing the risks?
So on this particular rule, the way that it seems to be written is about disclosure, not necessarily setting targets. However, if you target, you must verify or quantify where you are in relation to that target. So this is very much about data. If you're going to, it has at this point scope 1, scope 2, and material scope 3 emission reporting. For those of you not familiar, that's carbon emissions related to energy that's burnt on site. That's a scope 1, like gas. Energy that's burnt off-site on your behalf, which is electric, basically. And then scope 3 gets into things like your residence and make it into supply chain, all kinds of other areas, and that's where material. We have to be able to count that in order to report it. And so far, perhaps it's a year down the road, 2 years down the road, depending on the size of the company, this data has to be assured as well. So you're going to have data to comply with this. So if you don't know how much electric you're using and you haven't converted that into how much carbon impact that represents from a scope 1, scope 2 perspective, and potentially scope 3 if it's material, then you need to take a hard look at your data and start trying to figure out where, what is your impact as a company. And really, we should probably be measuring that anyway, because that also presents opportunities, because once you know where you're using more energy than you expect, that also presents the opportunity to reduce that and improve NOI.
Yeah, and I just published for everybody to be able to download. This will also be on our website later if you're not in a place where you can download it, but actually a checklist for REITs and for preparing for this rule to come out from the SEC. So I think that's a great tool to look over with your board of directors or your operations team to make sure you guys are compliant. Well, hey, I want to get into the social aspect of ESG. I think student housing companies and everybody in general have really been, putting a big focus as far as their social impact was concerned on employees. But housing providers have got a real opportunity to make a big impact with those that we're serving, our residents, as well as kind of our campus community at large. And just, kind of interested, are there some resources or general guidelines on how management companies can better provide that social impact with those groups?
So I'll start quickly, but I know Jill has one of my favorite social initiatives, so I'll definitely leave time for that. But I think it's really, like you said, Wes, it starts internally with the company culture, and then that permeates to how our employees can treat the residents, in this case, the students. And I think the real magic happens when you involve the local community. So really, it's about being in touch with what matters to your renter population. So we're seeing a lot of students are really passionate about climate change, about environmental justice, about biodiversity, like ensuring that we're protecting the resources that affect their future. So if you have partnerships in your local markets, or maybe it is a national partnership where you can say, our company recognizes that we have this population that really cares about food security, so we're going to partner with this nonprofit that helps us engage our residents in this way. What I would advise is just to make sure that you're kind of keeping track of which organizations you're partnering with. Maybe it's the number of communities that have partnerships with them, the number of hours that you've put into it. Maybe it's the dollars donated, so that you can kind of keep that story going internally to let them know, let your associates know about that, which keeps the company culture going. And then if you need to report that to investors or on an ESG report for an annual case, you can do that as well. But just kind of starting to keep track of the things you're already doing and connecting that with what matters to your population.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on some of the things that Maddie had already talked about. I mean, certainly being very focused on what, and it could be bespoke or it could be more general in terms of what are the types of programs you're doing at the community level, at the student housing level. It could be, like she just said, it could be tied to something that, what do they really care about? It could be donating food to the homeless. It could be volunteering. It could be whatever it is. A couple of things that we've done, and I think this first one is probably the one that Maddie was referring to, is we started a program called Student Care. Right now, the two populations that research has told us are the loneliest are seniors and students. Harrison Street as a company is one of the largest owners of students and the largest owner of senior communities. So what we did is several years ago, we started to cross-pollinate these two generations. We no longer live in a society where it's very commonplace for grandparents to live in the same household as grandchildren. So we're losing so much of that intergenerational knowledge in those relationships. So we've started this program, and it's not just a feel-good thing. There's actually financial benefits as well. We find from the senior living communities, they don't have to spend as much on overtime. They don't have to spend as much on recruiting costs. And frankly, everyone is living longer, so we need more caregivers. So to have this younger generation come in, that's been tremendous. From the student side, a lot of them are figuring out, this is something I want to do. This is a career path perhaps I had never considered. Maybe they were in some sort of a medical or healthcare field and never thought about it. We had one young woman that she told us before she started working in this field. To be completely honest, she said her and all of her friends were afraid of old people. I mean, oh my gosh, to be afraid of old people, that's just such a sad thing. But then she got this job and she said, this is what my career is going to be. She said, I love working in this community. Every day I leave so happy because I've helped people. And so it's a wonderful thing. So we can tie it back to financial and economic benefits. Plus there's all of these social aspects that just make it so much stronger. The other thing that we've done that we've committed to is on the health and wellness side. And we have committed to roll out Fitwell Healthy Building certification across all of our properties that have occupants in them. At this point, we have over 250 Fitwell projects. We have more than anyone else in the world right now in terms of Fitwell certifications, and we're doing it for a couple of reasons. One, because we just believe that if you have a building that's been blessed by the CDC as being deemed healthy, that creates an attractiveness, an advantage, a market differentiation, so to speak. We also think it helps attract students and staff to be living in these types of a building. So that's something that we just feel is important to us. So there are two aspects: the mental wellness and the overall health and wellness underneath social that we're doing.
And Fitwell, people can find out more about that at CDC's website.
They can find the CDC was the creator of Fitwell, the CDC along with the GSA, but the organization that is the licensor of it is an organization called the Center for Active Design. But if someone just was to type in fitwell.org, you can find out a lot more information about it.
Gotcha. Chris, you have anything to add to that?
No, they both covered it pretty well.
Well, hey, let's talk about governance, because I feel like that is kind of the one area that especially smaller student housing operators, are really kind of grappling with, because there's a lot of checking of the boxes, and that can be very overwhelming, obviously. And when you're looking at all the things that you have to do as a management company, and even as an ownership group, a lot of that doesn't give you that immediate ROI, and so it constantly gets put to the back burner. Can you kind of help those of us that are in those type of companies kind of break this down, chop it up into small bites? What can we kind of attack first? What should be our priority when we're looking at this?
I can go ahead and jump in. I guess maybe the first thing I'll say is just to kind of level set what is governance? What does the G mean here? So certainly what you're honing in on, Wes, here is around the reporting piece and kind of the checking of the boxes. Governance, just for everyone's edification, is of course bigger than that. We do a regular materiality survey every few years where we ask our investors, our operating partners, our employees, really all of our key stakeholders, what's most important to you, what's most material from an E, S, and a G perspective. We just completed our latest materiality survey, and if I just carve out the G piece, what are the top 3 or 4 things that they called out? Fiduciary responsibility, okay, that's kind of a given. Cybersecurity, maybe we don't think about cybersecurity as being under the G, but it would fall under the G. Data protection and privacy, kind of another similar in that vein of cybersecurity, and DEI. So these are the things that they're saying from a governance perspective are most important to them. So one of the things that I would say for anyone on the phone, if you're trying to figure out what you need to do, make sure you're talking with your key stakeholders, what's most important from them. Now, if we just carve it down to what's on the reporting side, because again, it can be overwhelming. You have that word on that slide, and that's a great word to use because there is so much, kind of separating out what's the must-haves and the nice-haves. If anyone's working with someone like us, an investment manager, where we do things like we submit to GRES, which is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, where we have to pull various key datas, it would be working very closely with an organization like ourselves to pull that information and get that information and do that. Do they have an ESG strategy? Do they have an ESG policy? Do they have someone in charge of kind of at least pulling it together and then really separating out the must-haves versus the need-to-haves? I don't want anybody to get into this point where they're starting to go down the path of green hushing or green whispering, saying, I don't even want to talk about what I'm doing around ESG because there's so much reporting or there's so much bureaucracy I need to do. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen. I want people to know, like, these are the right things to do. This is what's right for my key stakeholders. This is what's right for us as a company. And we're going to put the resources behind it because we see that this truly makes a difference and it makes us a better partner, a better company because we're doing this.
To hit really quick on the DEI from a governance standpoint, is that more of a makeup of the board, or is it more holistic, as to having that representation all throughout your company?
The rationale behind what, and again, some people do put DEI in the S bucket, so I want to recognize that. We put it in the G bucket because it has to do more about how you're governing your company.
Mm-hmm.
What are your hiring practices? How are you developing people? Does everyone have the same opportunity? What is your board look like? What does your investment committee look like? It's all part of that, but it really is tied more back to the culture. It's not a social program. We don't put it in social because it's not a social program where we're like, well, we need to do all these social activities to increase DEI. It's more of, this is a belief, this is how we govern our business, and this is how we run our business. So that's why we have it there. I'm not that caught up in terms of where people put it, as long as they're doing the right things. But for us, it's far bigger than a social initiative. It truly is how we govern our business.
Gotcha.
Wes, one thing I just want to add on the G as well is about scalability, which is pretty real for us for sure with the size of our portfolio. But really, this G provides that ability to be scalable. G provides consistency. G provides the policies and procedures that allow you to be consistent across all your operations, whether you have 2 properties or you have 2,800 properties. So key to me, honestly, if I were to rename it, it would be GES, because G drives the E, G drives the S. And really, G sets up the framework in which we operate. And if you don't have those policies and procedures in place, then we already have them in place. Like the way we lease, typically, we don't want our properties leasing differently at every single property. We want some consistency. We want to be able to look at that. And so those policies and procedures, that's really, in my mind, one of the most important things about G is it sets up that framework that we operate consistently across the portfolio.
Well, for a company that's hearing what you're saying, Chris, and saying, and kind of looking back and saying, gosh, we got, we really need to step back. We did all the things of creating our core values and those type of things, but we really didn't spend the time on these kind of aspects. Is it best to reach out to a consultant? Is it, is there a fantastic workshop you suggest they go to, or?
What I tell people is exactly what Jill said that they do. First, you need to ask the question, why? Why are you doing this? And that's what the materiality study does. Whether you do that in-house or you do that third party. I personally kind of like it being a third party, because I think whenever you're asking your stakeholders what's important to them, you may get some more depth into the answers when it's a third party asking it. Versus in-house, you remove some bias potentially that could be there. But honestly, that's the first step, is why are you doing this in the first place? What is the goal you're trying to meet? And then you design the program around meeting those goals.
Gotcha. So I know we've gone over, and I appreciate the extra time you guys have given. There has been one question, and this was from Mike Rediker again. I don't know if this was so much for this panel versus the last, but Maddie, it goes back to build on your question to that previous panel as well. But how do your firms work with local governments and universities to build affordable housing in new developments while ensuring deals generate required returns? I think that's again, going back to your question, and we could talk about all these great social activities that we can do to help those in our in our neighborhoods that are struggling with food insecurity and things like that. But if the housing isn't so expensive, there may not be food insecurity. So just wondering, what kind of conversations are you guys having within your firms on how to attack that? Anybody?
I'll just throw out one thing that we've been talking about if we're in situations where the property itself is not 100% leased up, working with the university to identify those students that have some sort of a scholarship, but maybe not a full ride, maybe housing isn't part of it, and actually giving those students those empty beds that frankly we weren't going to lease up anyhow.
And I think probably I would answer it a little more broadly in the sense that a lot of this goes back to planning and beginning with the end in mind. So whenever you're setting up your pro forma for the property initially, knowing what the goals are for the operation of that property, it's important to build this into it. But, if you're doing sustainability right, you're reducing wasted electricity, wasted water, wasted waste stream, I guess the trash. That's reducing expenses. So we're creating value. We're reducing expenses with these programs, which should generate some revenue. Obviously, or not necessarily revenue, but operational expense that could help fund some of these programs. But if you don't begin with the end in mind, if you don't have these built into your pro forma, into your initial, theory for the investment, then it does make it difficult. So it's important to plan ahead.
Well, great. Well, guys, I appreciate so much for the time and the extra time today of covering this topic. And I'll make sure that when we put the video out on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and for replay, that you've got your contact information there in case anybody has any questions specific for you guys that maybe they didn't want to ask today. Again, thanks so much. Well, guys, that will do it for today's Shop Talk. Thanks so much for attending. The next one is Thursday, July 13th. We're back on Thursdays for next month, and there will not be one for August because we're all busy with turn, and the last thing you want to do is jump on a webinar. So again, please share Shop Talk with your colleagues if we've brought you any value today. That's the biggest way you can thank me. Send them to shoptalk.info, and we'll make sure that they get registered to get updates of when our next meetings will be. Guys, thanks so much.
Thanks, Wes.